Dr. Edward Conze was one of those European super scholars that you sometimes find at American universities filling specialized spots. His specialty was Buddhist studies, especially the Prajnaparamita, the perfect wisdom. This perfection of wisdom has about 40 sutras associated with it, and he translated all of them into English, even though German was his native language. His translations are extremely close to the original, and some of the translations are a little bit contrived. Like Praticca Samutpada, the 12 links of the dependent arising, he rendered as dependent co-arising. Co relates to the sum, and the other words are lined up nicely. He was my first guru. And to do a little bit of bhakti here, he was an outstanding gentleman. But he didn't allow us to treat him like a guru, even though some people had that in mind. Instead, he was our professor, and he sure put us through the paces. He gave a single course in Buddhist history, but his real concern was passing on the sacred Dharma in a way that modern people could understand. We were mostly enthusiastic students. We took the ball and ran with it, so to speak. I had been in linguistics, and Conze was looking for people to train as translators. So I was a good candidate, and we had an interview, and that was that. I dropped linguistics and moved into Buddhist studies. He had a way of stretching the scholarly capability of his students. One time I asked him about the 7 meanings of the word Dharma, and he gave me a cite. One Geiger wrote a send up of the term Dharma and talked about all 7 meanings. I couldn't find that book. Another time, he sent me into the Pali tradition, and I discovered that the cause and effect has one cause and about 24 possible conditions. These causes and conditions determine the arising of all phenomena that we experience. There was a controversy. Dr. Conze in the 30s was a communist, and he had a PhD in philosophy. It turns out he was chosen to go to the East, the negotiations between the Nazis and Russia, a non-aggression pact involving the supply of oil to the Germans. That was successful for the moment, but then later Hitler broke the pact. But at the time, it was a definite success. And at one point during the gatherings, a couple of SS officers approached him and said, we're theosophists, and we believe you have great wisdom to give to the world. And so we're going to warn you. It turns out 2 police precincts had merged records, and his name was on both lists, which meant they were going to arrest him. So with that warning, he proceeded to leave the country. It was the kind of situation the Gestapo was coming in the front door. He's going out the back door. He got away and went to England. And there was another hit list of the people in England that need to be exterminated when we take over the island. And his name was on that one too. But many of the communists of the day were extremely appalled when the International sold out the Spanish Revolution and did not supply any aid whatsoever to that cause. And Franco demolished the Spanish resistance. And many people were disillusioned. The nation state Russia had usurped the experiment, and there was no help for any of the communists in the rest of the world at the time. Well, that came back to him. He was at the University of Washington, and our class consisted of maybe 30 people, 40 people. And not all of them were going to be translators, but all of them got very enthusiastic about the Buddha Dharma, the teachings of the Buddha. He had a way of speaking multiply. He'd have one thread of whatever he was explaining and subtexts. He could isolate one person in the room and speak to that person without losing the thread of the discourse. And that happened to me a couple of times. I was surprised. One time I was thinking about a terrible incident in my life where I inadvertently got caught up in the whirlwind. I was in a world that was populated by insectoid beings, and it was extremely disconcerting. And I was sitting in class thinking about that incident. What the hell was it? And he looked directly at me without dropping the thread of the current discourse and said, "Oh, that was just the demon world." And then I understood where I'd been at, and it was a great relief. He inspired me considerably. And once I discovered the Abhidharma, he had mentioned it, and I looked into it, and away I went. I spent most of the rest of that quarter immersed in the subtleties of Abhidharma philosophy. I saw him on the street a couple of times, and one time he modeled for me what mindfulness meditation of a very focused sort is. He cast his glance towards the ground in front and concentrated, being aware of his body. That's the meditation that's associated with the idea of mindfulness. It turns out that the head of the Far East department at the UW had been a communist in Germany in the 1930s. But in his case, he decided to try the capitalist route, and he wanted to transform the Far East Department into an adjunct of the US State Department. Count the coal mines in China and estimate the amount of nuclear material and on like that. Speaking of nuclear material, the memoirs that he left behind were in 3 volumes. I read the first 2, which is where I get this information. He said the first 2 were The Dance of the Cobra, and the 3rd one, which was never published, was The Bite of the Cobra. In any case, the head of the department started bullying the humanists, trying to get him in line to make the transformation, and they were all a little bit wishy-washy, and were afraid of him. But Conze stood up to him, and the controversy raged for a while, and they accused him of teaching communism, not teaching Buddhism at all. And I, for one, am still a Buddhist after all these years. It was probably well-versed in Marxist theory. It certainly sounded like it. One time he named the best dialectician among the philosophers. Another time he flat out stated anybody with any brains was a communist in the 30s. But things had changed for the worse. The civil rights campaign was in full swing at the time. And he was clearly against the Vietnam War and made no effort to hide that fact. And that, of course, fueled the fire. He did occasionally mention some Marxist idea or other, but 99% of his discourse was related either to personal transformation or to the Buddhist teachings. And he taught well, very eloquent at times. He liked his Guinness beer, and he often, not often, but occasionally had a cigarette in his hand. And I never once saw him take a toke on it. He just used it as a prop. The accusation of being still a communist, weighed heavy on the situation. And finally, the controversy boiled over, and Michael, the head of the department, and Taylor, another right-winger, got his visa pulled and got him deported. He had a way of dramatizing the class. When Martin Luther King was killed, we went to class and he announced, today a man named King has died and America has lost the last shred of its dignity. Class dismissed. And that, of course, sunk in pretty deep, but we were mostly anti-Vietnam War to start with, so it was really no surprise that that was said. There were a small group of Chinese speakers. I had been taking Chinese, wasn't too far along in that, but I was definitely an enthusiastic student of Chinese. So about 5 of us went to San Francisco to a Zen temple. Personally, I left the university and the academic life forever in my mind. And indeed, I didn't go back and finish my bachelor's degrees until 1984. So that I was done with the academy and going seriously for Chinese Zen. That didn't work out either, and I was back in the wandering mode and wandered up and down the coast, not caring about much of anything. Meanwhile, the entire Buddhist Studies program was shut down, and they gave the money to anthropology, and that was the end of Buddhist Studies at the UW. Currently, they have another Buddhist Studies program that evolved. I don't know how good it is, but given the fact that the UW is well thought of, it's probably pretty good, but my time for that has passed. Yeah, I'll end with another nuclear reminder. Conze was on a train, probably in England somewhere, and he suddenly had a wave of nausea and vertigo. And it turns out that was the time when the A-bomb was dropped on Hiroshima. And then Nagasaki followed a few days later. And all those people in the Bardo, sudden death for thousands. There was, as they say, a disturbance in the force. So we went on. I did learn a lot of Buddhism in the course of my life. I would hang out in various university libraries and dig through the Buddhist Studies program that they had available in the book stacks, and found some interesting things. It's necessary for me to sign off of this. I don't know if I can publicize it or not. It's a little bit shaky, but I'll do my best. In any case, thank you for your attendance, and do bhakti yoga with your guru, whoever it is. It'll transform you.